Moneymakers, welcome to this channel. My name is Mr Du Plessis, aka the EMS guy. So in today's video we're going to focus on the standard of living, the quality of life, and how the government actually plays a role in it. But that also means we have to understand what is societies. So make sure you don't miss this video, subscribe, like the channel, and let's dig in. So today's topic, we're talking about lifestyles. Self-sufficient societies, where it came from. Did we start with motorcycles, or how did they come into being? We will focus on rural societies, the impact of development on the environment, unemployment, and how to use resources effectively. So standard of living, you can see in the cartoon, and with me holding this toy, there's two different standards of living, but it starts with what a person earns. Alright, so if you earn a lot of money, you can buy this nice KTM Red Bull motorcycle. Why? They cost a lot of money, but if your income level is not as high, it will be impossible for you to buy that and to maintain it. So the rich have this high standard of living, and the poor, they have this struggle just to survive, right? A low standard. But then we have our middle income, our households, and they have a fair life, a sustainable life, how can we call it, a comfortable life, right? So we have to understand what's the difference between a lifestyle and a standard of living. That's two concepts that we must understand. Lifestyle says this is your quality of life, the way you live. Do you go out and do an activity every day? Do you live healthy? Do you eat healthy? Do you get 8 hours of sleep? How do you do that? On what do you do that, right? Versus living standard says, how much money do you earn? How much do you spend? So one is linked to a quality of life, right? It's your way that you do it. The other one is linked to how much money do I get in order to improve that. So this includes your educational standards. If we look at it, both of them, your work environment, your physical and mental health of people, that has an impact on you. How much money you have will not necessarily make you a more content person, but it will make you a richer person. But that doesn't mean you've got a quality of life. So when we look, all of this started way back, where communities were self-sufficient. That meant they worked for themselves. They had to plant what they had to get from the field. They had to provide in their own needs. They had to provide their own resources. But then came the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s, right? And they said, let us produce en masse. That led to people saying, well, now everything is produced in mass. We have to start buying it. But people still lived in rural communities. So that caused this massive flock to the cities. We're going to get to the urbanization a bit later. That changed, or that led to a change in their lifestyles. So people now, when they produced in mass, it led to mass consumption. But in that, this led to a new society, from self-sustainable, where everyone produced what they need and needed, and then they started bartering, into a modern society where people flocked to the cities. They gave up the space and lived now in small apartments, but now they got this work. They worked for someone in a factory, they got paid, and now they can buy whatever they want. So there's a massive change. So people started working, machinery was introduced, and farm workers left the farms. Now there was a challenge to this, because there was a high demand for jobs, because people fled the cities. Infrastructure wasn't updated. There wasn't enough space to live, and with the flood of labor into the market and people introducing machines, now they didn't require a lot of labor, so they actually underpaid people, and that's where the trade unions also originated from. So let's focus back on the rural areas, rural societies. So there was still a contingent of people that said, I do not want to live in a modern society. I don't want to be crammed up. I want to be outside. I want to farm. And they were not developed as such as the cities with electricity and flush toilets and all of the fancy McGaffers that we get in cities. But they wanted to have a easier way of life. So they live in small places far away from cities, and they wanted to just provide for themselves. But in that we saw the move of this modernization, we saw farmers said, listen, I need more land. I need to buy out these societies. I want to become a mega farmer in order to produce food for the masses that live in the cities. So that's where mega farmers started. And now they became the feeders of society, and they're no longer self-sufficient. Now that had an impact on the development of our environment. Poor countries, right, they are still developing. They don't have access to these technologies. So a lot of their communities look as we just described it. Whereas the industrialized, the richer countries are developed. They've got access to incredible technologies. Europe, for example, in the logistics arena, they have incredible technologies that with a touch of a button, you get a product that was in a shelf 10 seconds ago without one person touching it. It's incredible. In South Africa, we will probably see it only in a few years because it's so expensive. So we are still developing, but we have developed in some areas. So we're a mix. Now, incredible stat says 40% of our population lives in rural areas. That means they're not part of the secondary sector, they're not part in factories, but they still live in rural areas, meaning they're self-sustainable and they've got small shops that they want to sustain. But that means there's less resources, less technology, and they actually have to make it work themselves. But because of this, that they need to survive, sometimes they take advantage of the resources that they have and they misuse it. In the cities, we know it's very limited, so people start using it sparingly. But here we see that people start misusing it. That's overgrazing of the cattle, overfishing, less trees when they chop it down, pollution, and that leads to all kind of health issues, right? So people want a better life. They want to avoid that. So then they migrate to urban areas instead of rural areas. And now there's even more pressure on the cities in the urban sides. For example, infrastructure, housing. Where do you build it? Do you build it on this side of the river, in a valley, on top of a mountain? And that leads to risk that they actually enter into. Is it a risk area or not? So it opens up a whole lot of questions. So there was 3 concerns. How do we sustain the Earth's resources? What about global warming? And these are issues that we face every day. And how do we prevent further environmental damage so that there's something left for our kids, your grandkids? So climate change is another factor that we have to look at. Deforestation, it's a massive impact that we see. And now one of the strategies that people say is, listen, we have to stop. We have to protect the environment. So let's replant trees. Let's clean up the ocean. Let's take away plastic. Let's catch that. But the one big issue with that is unemployment. There's not enough work in this country, right? That's one of the government's focus areas, to say, how can we make sure that there's enough work? So unemployment says it's a person that wants to work, but they can't find work. Underemployment says people want to have more hours to work, but they can't find more work. Now in South Africa, we've got 2 sectors, the formal and informal sector. The formal sector employs only 41% of our population. So this is where the government and the private sector plays a big part. The informal sector is where you find the people sitting on the street selling fruit, veggies, vet cooker, all of these small things, and it's not a registered formal business. So we do not know actually how big this industry is, but it is massive. So what challenges do we face? We face job creation, training and retaining people in jobs. And now that's something that the government has to do. So they focus on these key drivers. We need to change our infrastructure to be able to handle it. We must make sure that the agriculture and mining is up to date and we keep up with technologies. We must make sure that the manufacturing industry are up to it and make sure that the costs are driven down so that it's sustainable. Tourism. And now they've taken hands with the United Nations, which is an organization that says, let's take care of the world, right? To make sure we use our resources sparingly, to protect it for our children. And they discuss problems to say, what about the ocean? How do we do that? How do we deforestation? How do we address that? Desertification, what do we do that? And then they say, let's create a strategy. Don't litter. Recycle. Stop the waste of water. Reuse plastic. Turn off the lights if it's not used. Plant trees. So in this video, we know it is incredibly important that we should take care of the environment. Because if we deplete it, if we don't make use of it effectively, productively, we're going to overuse it, abuse it, and there will be nothing left for future generations. I thank you, and with this, let's continue to shift our education.